that right?
Yes.
The switch? Yeah, there's a switch to flick up.
Kind of. So let me do a quick introduction, actually. Hi, I'm Karthik. I work for TNO. For those of you who don't know about it, TNO is over there in the corner. It's the Dutch Applied Research Organization, an RTO. And we work on a wide variety of projects across the board, many of which we found out concern secondary use of data, and especially many of which intersect also with the EHDS. We also work with the other data spaces that were being mentioned earlier, but yes, in this context, so I'm here today to talk about specifically a project called Blueberry, but when dealing with all of these different projects, we realized, me and my colleague Diana, that we were kind of answering similar questions across projects. So we decided to pool those questions together, pool that knowledge together into a work-in-progress white paper. That's the other part of what I'm presenting today. And I heard mention of multidisciplinary work, which is necessary for this field. And that's exactly what we do. I take more of a legal perspective to the topic. My colleague Diana takes more of the privacy enhancing tools perspective to the topic. But also in all of the different projects that we work with, we have multidisciplinary teams that try to balance different perspectives out. So this was my game plan for the presentation. First, the introduction, a short slide on the methods, and then the state of play. I have to admit, the state of play has been covered by speakers more eloquent than I am, so I'm going to speed through that part and focus more on the Blueberry blueprint, which is a slightly different perspective on a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about today, and conclude with a short slide on the ongoing work that we plan to do next with this white paper. So, the introduction, honestly, is perhaps very familiar to all of you. I don't need to go too much into it. We try to explore the techno-legal challenges of using PETs, or to put it much more simply, how can we use PETs in the secondary use of health data, right? The methods that we use, which is where the multidisciplinarity comes in, we do legal doctrinal analysis with recent EU regulations, guidance, and case law. We try to be exhaustive with this, but given language issues, which were also mentioned earlier, this becomes a bit tricky. I've recently found out quite a lot about legislation that I did not know about. And we also have a narrative review of academic and grade literature, which we try to make it as comprehensive as we can. But the objective of all of this is to try and identify sample flows, and why that is I'll come back to in a second. So state of play, as I said, this has been covered quite a lot in detail already, but just to summarize and emphasize, PETs do not guarantee legal compliance. This is due in part to the diversity of PETs, and the fact that PETs are targeted towards specific risks. There was an excellent slide from Eric on the balance between anonymization and usability of data. But there's also a balance that we find in these projects with standardization, and I'm going to come back to that in a second. And then we have already discussed quite a lot of the variance in member states' definitions when it comes to anonymization. We are also very familiar with the absolute and relative risk-based approaches. So I will speed through that as well. However, just to emphasize one part from the Single Resolution Board case, if I understood correctly, is that there was an emphasis on the fact that the data was shared in a controlled environment and that the data was itself controlled, which is where we come to the Blueberry blueprint. Now, what is Blueberry? Blueberry is a project where we try to set up an infrastructure for federated learning to be used for the secondary use of health data. This is a collaboration with multiple organizations, including in the Netherlands, ICNIL, the Cancer Research Organization. And this is one of the outputs from the Blueberry project. So I will come to the technical parts of Blueberry in the next slide, but just to recap, right? What happened in Blueberry, what they set up in Blueberry is a standardized framework for how to conduct federated learning. And how they implemented this is that they have participating centers. Each of those centers is an independent autonomous controller. They set up their own independent database, they control that database, and they collect the patient data into that database. All of the participating centers have an agreement with the Huracan registry. The Huracan registry does not control data sharing. It is not a joint controller. What the agreement for the Huracan registry does is that it sets up a framework for the functioning of the federated learning architecture via an open source tool called Vantage 6. It has agreements about the role of participating centers, and it has commitments to comply with the GDPR. What the Huracan registry also does is it sets up a coordinating center which provides templates. So for example, if you see the authorized researcher, they have to be expressly appointed. There is a template for that. At the same time, they also provide documents to assist with anonymity assessments, because each participating center is independently supposed to verify whether let me actually come back to that in a second. So what happens in this case is that the participating centers have the data. The data is stored with the internal databases in the participating centers. And when an authorized researcher who is a part of this framework has a query that they want to run, they will submit that query to Vantage 6, the system, and that goes to the Huracan registry. The registry will conduct its own checks on the query, and if they approve it, they will send that query forward to the participating center. The participating center will then conduct its own assessment to identify whether this query will release anonymous data or non-anonymous data, or personal data, I should say. And if they approve it, then the query is run through the Vantage 6 framework, and only the results of that query, aggregated results, are returned to the researcher. And the participating centers have to verify that there is no personal data that is released in this way. And one more point I should mention for this slide is that for this framework, the participating centers, the Huracan registry has a guideline that helps participating centers make anonymity decisions based on actually Italian legislation. Now, this is the typical flow of an algorithm in Vantage 6. My excuses for the gray text. But on the left, you see the researcher. And on the right, the two private networks that you see are the participating centers. And in this middle is the central server. What essentially, the journey starts on the left with the central task. And it starts from the researcher to the center, the circle that you see in the center, that's the task storage. When the task is initiated, it creates an algorithm container in one of the nodes at one of the participating centers. That node is then duplicated. It creates subtasks, my apologies, and those are duplicated in the other nodes. And when the results from those are calculated, those results go back to the central node. They are aggregated, and the aggregate is sent to the researcher. Now, this is Vantage 6, which we use in Blueberry. And what this highlighted for us was, so in this framework, what the Huracan registry and what Vantage 6 can also do is that they can create a central algorithm store. And that algorithm store can be used to contain algorithms that have been pre-approved. Like if you check certain tasks and you put that into the algorithm store, those are pre-approved, and it's more of a standard operating procedure, for example. But this is where, so we have covered a lot of the, I had a lot of things I would like to add about the balance between anonymization and usability, but those have been covered in quite a lot of depth already. And there is that balance that has to be maintained here, right? How do we keep the data useful while still maintaining data protection, while still maintaining privacy? But one of the other things that we did notice in this as well is that, so when we try to use PETs this way, when we try to standardize this process across multiple participating partners, across jurisdictions, across, if I may use the word, interoperability questions, it becomes easier to use PETs for predetermined specific detailed questions, for the standardized questions that you can store in the algorithm store, where you have a preset set of steps that you can take for the pseudonymization. If you would like to run more exploratory research, if you'd like to run more broad questions, that is harder to do with these PETs. PETs in this sense are tools in a toolbox, as someone put very brilliantly earlier today, and they're not a silver bullet. They are very much context-based. And what we are continuing to do with this white paper is try to identify different data flows and different PET configurations that, once again, enable data to be useful, but still put privacy first. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you. That's very important. It's clearly an architecture that helps to really de-risk a very important area of innovation. And I think it is, to me, a very important balancing act. And I like the word balance, which also will come up in the next talk, because we need not to imagine that data is living in a free-for-all space where Magali was talking about. I don't think she called it the Wild West, but somewhere like that, that actually it's sitting inside an architectural space where the protections are not only inherent in the data, but in the things that contain and manage the processing of data. And it's that holistic approach that's so important. Any questions?
Well, thank you very much. It was very interesting to see how this kind of setting work in the practice. This setting helps to enhance some of the privacy principles. I can think about confidentiality. I can think about the security principle. Transfers, because that helps to avoid transfers, so you get the transfer out. But how, in this setting, was there any thinking about how to manage the information and transparency bit? Because even if the data are being processed locally, you are still processing it for potentially new purpose, which maybe wasn't covered by the initial information. So was there any advancement on or experimentation on this front?
Yes, actually, if I may, can I use this to go back to my slides? Anyway, so yes, that was actually one of the conclusions from the project, especially in the sense of if we try to use secondary use from the pseudonymization or anonymization perspective, it is still not always satisfactory. You do still need to have transparency and communication, right? And that is the next step of what we are researching in this project as well. There are a wide variety of resources available on that topic, on the different types of communication that we can do. There's an excellent paper on the design space for privacy notices and the channels that they use, how we can make them more understandable. That I may talk about this forever. That was the topic of my PhD thesis. But yes, that is incredibly important, and we also talked about this a little bit earlier, right? Consent is difficult. Consent is difficult because often we have to also have to give it when we don't really want to pay attention to the topic. As someone mentioned, cookie notices. Yeah, we don't pay attention to those as much as we should. But there are ways to, we try and figure out ways to address that concern by engaging with the patients, by giving them the right information at the right time, in the right context, layer it so that they have the most important information up front, and then they can go deeper into it when they want to. That's an ongoing question.
Okay, thank you very much. It's great to know that that is on your horizon, and that it's going to be something you'll be able to tell us about maybe on a future occasion.
I hope so.
Yeah, thank you very much. Please. Then can I ask Tatiana to come up?